Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our live MarTech Today webinar. I'm your host, Karen Burka. Our topic is Meet BIMI, the brand-boosting email security marketers must have for 2021. We are very pleased to welcome Rahul Pawar, CEO at Redsift, and Chris Bailey, Vice President of Strategy and Business Development for Entrust. Now, before I turn the webinar over to our speakers, let's go over a few helpful viewing tips. On your screen right now, you should see our presentation slides, a Q&A box, and our featured speakers. You can move or resize any of the windows to personalize your viewing experience. If you want to share this webinar with a friend or learn more about MarTech Today, Redsift, or Entrust, use the widgets at the bottom of your screen. We've also got a BIMI Resources widget, which features several assets provided by our sponsors, so make sure to take a look at those as well. If you run into any issues with this platform, use the Q&A box to communicate with us, and we will assist you. You can also submit questions for our speakers at any time, and we'll get to those at the end of the formal presentation. This broadcast will be made available on demand later this afternoon, and you'll receive an email when it's ready. So with that business taken care of, let me take a little more time to formally introduce our two speakers. Rahul Pawar is an experienced entrepreneur, technologist, and leader. Over his career, he has created software that has been distributed to over 100 million devices, built companies, and advised government and private industry on the intersection of policy and technology. Chris Bailey is a co-creator of extended validation and domain validated certificates used in the TLS/SSL connections. Having served in the industry since 1998, Chris is a current and founding member of industry standard groups, the CA/B Forum and the CA Security Council, where he continues to actively promote industry best practices and education. Remember, audience, if you have questions for our industry experts, please make good use of that Q&A box. I'll get to as many of those questions live after the formal presentations. So with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Rahul to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Karen. We want to be respectful of your time, so we're going to keep this quite focused. Let's take a look at the agenda for today. We'll run through what exactly BIMI is and the key benefits of the standard, how BIMI relates to your brand and your company, the IT requirements for implementing BIMI. We'll look at some of the early results of the BIMI pilot, discuss the timelines to becoming BIMI ready, and most importantly, steps to take today. What will happen after this webinar? Do feel free to ask your questions in the chat as you have them, and we'll try and answer most of them by the end of the webinar. The presentation should not take longer than 25 minutes. So let's begin. What is BIMI? Now, BIMI stands for Brand Indicators for Message Identification. It exists to insert trademark logos inside emails. It was created to offer the internet an open and interoperable way to put a logo into an email. This means that when a user opens up an email, your branded logo is seen in the avatar box, attaching that logo to your domain, which in turn will improve your brand recognition. BIMI is a way of standardizing the way these logos are displayed securely and next to the message in various inbox providers around the world. While you may think that displaying your logo is a purely visual benefit, there are actually two prongs to BIMI, the visual aspect and also the security aspect, and we'll be touching on this security aspect a bit later on in the presentation. So what are the benefits? Put simply, BIMI helps marketers create a consistent brand experience for email. It helps improve brand impressions. You also be able to improve email deliverability with DMARC. Now, don't worry if you don't know what DMARC is right now. We'll be talking about that later on in the presentation. But in short, it ensures that the emails you send are secure and not vulnerable to impersonation. At this point, let me invite Chris to talk to you about BIMI and how that relates to your brand.
Thank you, Rahul. Again, my name is Chris Bailey with Entrust, and we're going to talk about the VMC as it relates to BIMI. So the VMC stands for a Verified Mark Certificate. And in the first pilot case that we're working with Gmail on, it actually enables a registered trademark logo to appear automatically in a Gmail environment, so a Gmail email. This is a mock-up of what it would look like with no VMC certificate enabled and one with the VMC certificate. So the Gmail pilot had a small block of customers that we are working with. It's mainly geared to B2C senders. So think banks and travel agencies and others that might have a large block of Gmail users. Once the pilot is available, this logo was automatically picked up by the Gmail environment. So it's automatic for your end customers when you're sending emails. The general availability for the Gmail is currently will be sometime later this year. The schedule is TBD, but we think it'll be fairly soon. That is why we're here, because there's some things that we might want to do to prepare. In fact, the planning that we're talking about today is really around two pieces. Now, Raul will take the second piece, but the first piece is you need to have your trademarks ready. Trademarks are registered with various governments. We actually are supporting several, including the U.S. When you actually go to submit your trademark, it initially goes through a process, and that ultimately can take up to 6 months, maybe longer, depending on the trademark that you're filing. So it's something that if you don't have a trademark logo, you want to go ahead and look at registering that. Also, if you have a trademark that is in use today on your website, you want to make sure that you actually have the same trademark registered. So someone who's made modifications to their trademark on their website, their logo, it might not match the current trademark that you have on file if you do have one. So you just want to make sure you synchronize that. Also, you want to make sure that your trademark has the right aspect ratio. The available area that you saw before was more or less in a square environment. So that square space, the aspect ratio of 1:1, as you can see here in the second example, this is the same example of the Camel Travel Services, but if it's shrunk down to a small size in that same space, it looks like a squiggly line. So not very useful. So the ideal ratio of your logo probably should not exceed a 1:3 aspect ratio, or 3:1. Also, there'll be in some formats, there'll be a circle a presentation, so the edges, the corners of that logo might not appear, they might be cut off. So you might need to have a little bit more white space in the background of that logo. And so that's just something to consider. And so if your logo needs to shrink a little bit, you might want to take that into consideration too. The process of getting a VMC will require several vetting steps. These are processes to ensure that we are talking to and representing the right organization, the right people, the right logo. And this is leveraging the extended validation process that you might be familiar with certificates. This is showing the highest level of authentication, or verification for certificate. And we're actually making sure that the organization is the correct organization and the people have the right to represent that organization, as well as some of the other material, the address and where they're located. We're also making sure that you have a registered trademark and it matches that organization. There'll be a notary process that we work with a notary to make sure that you are representing your company, and we actually can have the right person on file. And then finally, there's a video verification process. This step, if you have the trademark, just takes a few days. but once that's done, then you'll have your VMC. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rahul to talk about the process with DMARC. Hi, Rahul.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yes, so the techie bit. As with most technologies, from email automation tools, tags, or even just simple website updates, BIMI requires a little bit of help from your IT team. And why is that? So I mentioned earlier on there that there's a security benefit to BIMI as well. Now, in order to implement BIMI, you have to be DMARC compliant. So as shown on the diagram on the right, DMARC is a foundational layer of BIMI. Without it, you can't qualify for BIMI. So DMARC is a security protocol that stops people from sending email purporting to be from your company. So you can prevent your customers from being the victim of a scam. Now, we've all heard the stories about customers receiving emails from someone pretending to be a known brand, asking them to update their account settings, for example. DMARC puts a stop to this and protects your brand's reputation. As you can imagine, this becomes even more important if you're presenting your logos to customers in email. I'm sure no one wants their trademarks to be used by fraudsters to deceive recipients. Whilst DMARC is a security prerequisite for BIMI, it also comes with a few key benefits for email marketing. Not only will you see an increase in deliverability rates, you'll also secure your domain and stop it from being spoofed. One of our customers, NewMed, a healthcare provider, reported an increase of deliverability from about 50% to over 95% using our automated solution on DMARC. So the pilot's been running for a little while, and we've been working with a couple of our early access customers, and I wanted to take a moment just to talk about some of the advantages that they're planning on based on implementing BIMI and the work that needs to happen to get ready. So let's take a look at some of the real-life examples that we've been working on to date. A well-known pizza brand came to us for DMARC recently. We're now working with them also on BIMI. For every 1% increase in their email marketing read rate, they would generate about an extra $1 million in revenue. For that reason, BIMI moves the DMARC project from security, strictly, to business enablement, where it's led by marketing, as email remains an essential channel of communication. Particularly with field marketing and other forms becoming scarce, email remains the chosen line of communication. In travel, interesting sector given the times, a leading company in the travel industry is another example where email security and brand impression have taken a big priority. They've been an on-DMARC customer for a while now, and when we approached them on BIMI, they jumped at it. Given the current state of the industry, increasing the return on investment on email marketing helps them navigate the tricky situation that we're all currently in. Now, this is probably the most important bit of our presentation today. It's really about how do you get a BIMI project up and running and what are the dependencies. So the number one thing to do as marketers is to choose your logo and check that it's trademarked. We can't stress this enough. Trademarks can take a long time, so it's best to square that one off right away. And as Chris mentioned, you will need one of these to really go live with your BIMI project. Depending on the jurisdiction, the application process can be long. You may want to make tweaks to what you currently have trademarked to have it better present, as Chris mentioned, in this new format. While you're doing that, ask your IT team to implement DMARC. We here at Redshift can help with that. We can walk your IT team through the steps. They may be on the journey already. Once you've got your logo and trademark sorted and your IT team have the DMARC policy in place, Entrust can verify all your documents and issue you a VMC. At that point, you're ready to publish your BIMI record. It's worth noting that if you have multiple logos, each logo will require a separate VMC. So looking at the chart in a bit more detail, here are a couple of steps to take today. Simply start with a kickoff project call hosted by us. We're happy to be as helpful as required. We'll provide both teams a free 15-minute consultation. We'll take care to guide both the marketing and IT teams through all aspects of the business to ensure you qualify for BIMI. As you can see here, the two departments will be working at the same time to achieve a VMC and DMARC compliance to become truly BIMI ready. After this webinar, we'll be sending out some more information and the opportunity to request that 15-minute consultation. So this is really as easy as we can make it. Okay, so it was a quick run through, but with that, we're at the end of our prepared materials. So I'd like to hand it back to Karen for any questions we may have had.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Yes, that was a great overview, and audience, we feel very strongly that we want to dig into your questions and your specific needs when it comes to BIMI, and we've been getting quite a few questions already, so I think we're going to have a real robust conversation now with our two speakers. So why don't we get right to it? I'm going to give Rahul a second to catch his breath, and I'm going to start with a question for Chris. So everyone's clear, I'm going to push the question into our slide area, and then I'll be able to read it. Our audience will be able to see it, and our speakers will be able to see it as well. So let's start here. All right, Chris, so what is the process for acquiring a VMC? And we've had lots of acronyms, and you and Rahul have done a great job of describing what they stand for. Maybe you can start us off here.
Sure. So the Verified Mark Certificate is a pretty straightforward process. We will vet your organization. We will ensure that your trademark is registered and connected to that organization. But and we can issue that Verified Mark Certificate. But in conjunction with the Verified Mark Certificate, we do need to have this DMARC piece that Rahul was mentioning earlier to coordinate. These are the two functions that you would need to work with marketing to try to get the trademark and maybe legal, and also maybe work with your security team in conjunction with Rahul's team at RedSift, and try to make those two pieces work. Once those two pieces are in place, it automatically works for the end user. So think, it's from the end user. There's no interaction from their part.
Great. Let's keep going, and we'll pass one over to Rahul. All right, Rahul, for DMARC, how do you still allow automated systems such as MailChimp, ActiveCampaign, et cetera, any of these email systems that people may use, to still send out the emails with your domain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a very common requirement for most organizations that have any scale when it comes to implementing DMARC, and that's actually been one of the big challenges for early adopters of the standard. So for everyone's benefit, when you implement DMARC, you're implementing email security not just for your human-to-human email, right? You might be on Exchange, you might be on Office 365 or G Suite, and you have real users with inboxes sending out emails to people inside your organization and people outside your organization. But obviously, especially for marketers, it's really all of the nurturing and engagement and marketing tools that send out emails on behalf of the organization that you really have to get sorted, and that's where a lot of challenges lie. So typically what happens is that these infrastructures set very high volumes. They're typically hosted outside your core cloud infrastructure. They're still branded with your company and your domain. And the challenge with implementing DMARC there is, how do I authorize these services to send securely on my behalf? And that's where tools such as ours really come into play, because there are a whole bunch of security technologies that DMARC is built on that allow this federation of service, but you've got to get it right, because if you don't get it right, your mail shots will basically go nowhere. Once you turn on DMARC, the biggest challenge organizations have is getting all of these little knobs and tweaks set up correctly, so that when they do fire out their million user marketing campaigns, or they fire out their re-engagement campaigns, every single one of those emails that they send is properly authenticated, so that A, they enjoy the benefit of the deliverability boost that comes with getting this stuff right, and they also qualify for the VMCs that we've been talking about in this conversation. So the reason why we engage with IT teams is help them to get all of this stuff right with the tooling and the software and the intelligence that our SaaS platform provides.
Great. And even though I'm directing questions to one or the other of you, Chris or Rahul, if either of you want to jump in on any of these questions, please don't hesitate to just chime in before I get to the next one. So Chris, did Rahul cover everything that needs to be said there? We should keep moving on?
Rahul answered the question perfectly. Yes, no additional data. Thank you.
Great. All right, let's go back to one that we can get your thoughts on. All right, Chris, just to be clear, BIMI and VMC are different, correct? Why use one over the other? So that's a good question as well.
Yeah, there was an earlier slide that Rahul presented, and it was presenting the framework where BIMI is really a framework technology to present these logos inside of messages. VMC specifically is the technology that Google has or will be adopting in the pilot and looking to go into production. That technology itself is different because it allows for cryptographic transfer of that material into the mailbox provider, in this case Gmail. That's, in short, that ensures that the material is sent over to Gmail securely instead of into a non-cryptographically secure connection. So that provides a level of security from the marketing standpoint. It just works, and that is the only way that Gmail is intending to use it. So if you need the image to show up in Gmail, you need a VMC as well as the DMARC technology in the background properly configured.
Great. Right. Audience, you're sending in some great questions here. Keep them coming. We're going to keep going. All right, Rahul, we'll go back to you. And then I think this is going to lead into audience questions for both of you. All right, at what stage of the DMARC journey do you need to be at to start to implement BIMI? That's a great question, too.
Yeah, great. So this is a bit of detail that we didn't go into in our material, but technically DMARC has two different levels of deployment. The first level of deployment is basically a policy of what the standard calls none. And what that means is that when it's deployed at that level, you get DMARC logging, which is a sort of type of telemetry that you get with DMARC, but you don't get any DMARC security. Now because BIMI relies very heavily on DMARC to provide the security aspect, the BIMI standard, as has been agreed by the BIMI working group and the providers like Google, require you to actually have DMARC in a protective mode. That is a policy of quarantine or reject. So essentially what that means is that your IT team has to have all of your email infrastructure set up to a stage where it's actually having a protective effect on attacks such as impersonation and spoofing. And to do that, you really need to be a sort of fair distance down your DMARC journey, sort of pretty much close to full enforcement, before your domain becomes sort of qualified for BIMI from a security perspective. So, for people who've heard of DMARC before, they may have heard of the fact that it's just kind of a little DNS change that you need to do. That's true for the first stage of the journey. That gives you the telemetry, but to really get DMARC into its full deployment stage, you're going to have to engage with the teams, and your teams are going to have to engage with some tooling such as ours to really get everything configured correctly. It's only once your policy is at a quarantine state of 100%, that means that 100% of your emails are actually being scanned for the security signatures of DMARC, that a provider like Google will actually then start to look at the VMC and then start to show your logo next to those emails.
Great. So building off of that question, go ahead.
I'll just throw one more thing. I realize that the question is around DMARC, and I just want to make sure that from the VMC perspective, just to repeat, you definitely want to look for your registered trademark status that we talked about earlier, and make sure that you have that, because that is something you'll need to have squared away before you get to that point.
Great. Thanks for adding that in. So, Chris, let's stick with you there. And like I said, I think this question sort of builds off that. And we want to hear from both of you on this. What would be, so here's where you need to be to start, what would be the approximate time it would take to get BIMI in place? Say if you're starting from zero, no DMARC, no trademark or correct logo.
Well, I'll start with this. Working backwards on the timeline, if you have nothing, you don't have a trademark, you don't have DMARC in place. The trademark will probably be the thing you want to focus on. I would say in step 1A, but step 1B, and these are simultaneous steps, would be the trademark. So, excuse me, the DMARC, getting that set up too. Both of them take some time. The trademark is somewhat in your control to start the process, but you generally have to file it with a government agency, so it typically can take longer, months. Where the DMARC technology, you have a little more control over that, working with a strong provider of that service like RedSift, and they can help accelerate that. And a lot of it depends upon the interaction of the organization with the provider. But well, I'm going to let you take that one. But I think you should start off with both simultaneously. But if you don't have the trademark in place, you're talking about probably 6 months, and you might want to give yourself some cushion there for the trademark, registered trademark logo.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so the DMARC question, I'm sure no one wants to hear this, but it sort of depends. It depends on a couple of things. One is, how much resource does the organization have? What's the sophistication of the tooling that they're using? How complex is the organization inherently? So to give you some examples, our customer base might go from someone who's like a regional retailer all the way up to a global telco. And, if the organization has a lot of infrastructure, and a lot of that infrastructure is incredibly bespoke or distributed across, a lot of different geographies, and, there's a lot of fact-finding that has to go on, the DMARC project can take some time. But conversely, if you have an organization that's, maybe more regional, maybe more local, or their infrastructure is in a slightly better shape, they can typically move much faster, especially if there's a will to get the project done. So, to give you some example, we helped an organization, a very visible healthcare organization, actually through the COVID crisis, who were getting heavily impersonated, stop their impersonation attacks within about 4 weeks through the full deployment of DMARC, and they were probably a mid-complexity organization if I were to sort of grade it. I think if you're a high-complexity organization, and here I'm thinking about a global telco who has, a lot of data centers, a lot of bespoke infrastructure, a lot of geographies, a lot of teams to work with, that could end up taking a little bit longer. For infrastructure like that, I would probably give it for 4 months or so, probably similar to the trademark application. But for most companies, I think, somewhere between 4 weeks and maybe 6, maybe 8, depending on the details of the infrastructure, with sophisticated tooling such as our own, is a reasonable project plan.
Great. And Rahul, you mentioned something interesting there that leads me to another question. So we'll stay with you on this. You mentioned about improvement in fraud. Interested to understand how exactly this reduces fraud, if at all, when it assumes a level of brand awareness up front. So maybe you could expand a little bit on what you just mentioned there about your experience with one of your clients.
Sure. So one of the main reasons people deploy the DMARC protocol, at least, is that it's a technical solution. So what DMARC stops is it stops exact domain impersonation. So what that would mean is that if you have a domain out on the internet, you send email using that domain. I mentioned NewMed before. Let's use newmed.com. If you send email via that domain, if you don't have a technology like, specifically if you don't have DMARC in place, it's very easy for a third party who's not you to pretend to be that domain. So what happens is they can effectively just use some software or some scripts and essentially send whatever email they want on the back of the domain newmed.com, and that's why we see quite a lot of impersonation attacks and deception that's out there. What the DMARC protocol does is it provides a technical solution to this problem by basically leveling up the email protocol to a more modern standard that stops this from happening. So once you have DMARC deployed in that protective manner that I described before, it's actually technically not possible for them to send that email. If you watch what Google says when you try and send that email, Google basically drops the connection and tells you to go understand what DMARC is. Basically, that's what it actually says on the wire. So the end user never has to make a judgment call on whether this email that purports to come from newmed.com is actually coming from newmed.com, and that's actually one of the key reasons why BIMI needs DMARC, because as you can imagine, if there was no guarantee at a technical level that this email had actually come from this domain, the VMC would be a bit of a nonsense. You wouldn't really be able to take this logo or this brand and associate with that domain. So the main thing around DMARC is that what we're talking about here are technical solutions that don't really need the user to make an assessment in that manner, and that's why they're effective at reducing fraud.
Great. Chris, anything that you would add to that?
No, I think Rahul answered it perfectly.
All right. Let's look at it then. I'm going to stay with you on this. Let's look at it from another kind of metric. Are there any metrics on the increase in customer read rates with BIMI enabled? So we're looking at reduction in fraud. How about improvement in customer read rates and who knows, maybe even interaction rates?
I can try to take this initially. Rahul might want to follow up. So DMARC does actually maybe help your email get through some of the clutter, so you might have more opportunities for people to read. The BIMI technology itself is an incentive structure in order to have DMARC. So it shows the logo in a way that's presented to give a better experience, brand recognition. Think about it as impressions of your brand. So from a marketing standpoint, it's a very low-hanging fruit. From a security standpoint and from a read standpoint, it's really more of a more immersive type of experience. So you'll have that benefit. But from an open rate, we haven't actually done the analysis of that from our side, but so we really can't speak to it. But you can imagine that having what a logo being in that email record might do for you. So I don't want to overpromise this, but we will be doing some more detailed research on this in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's right. The standard is relatively new, and it was obviously put together because of the various benefits that it could provide. I can speak to the DMARC piece, and we know that a number of our customers, especially our very B2C focused customers, actually come to deploy DMARC because properly authenticated and secured email does actually get treated by the various recipients in a more careful manner. We've seen, point by point examples where we would be able to take email out of spam or promotional boxes because all the authentication has been rectified using tooling. But we have some case studies up on our website that look at some of the benefits that particular companies may have experienced by deploying this. But of course, everyone's experience is different. It's a complex ecosystem, and email authentication is an important piece of that. But domain reputation, the content itself, spam reports, all that other stuff has a big influence on it. So we know it's good. We know it improves things. But in terms of what is the actual percentage benefit, you can look at that on a case-by-case basis with your own campaigns once you've done this. But it's always going to be a net positive.
Great.
I'll actually mention one more thing to this. Because BIMI is so new. There will be a separation of what your emails will look like from others, especially for the first, several months, a few years as technology rolls out. There will be differentiation in that aspect as well.
Great. Thanks for clarifying that, Chris. Let's stick with you on this next question, Chris. Is there a limit to how long your VMC is valid for?
Currently, in the pilot program, the limit is 6 months. The production, we're planning on a 1-year certificate. And that's actually aligned with the industry standard today, as far as other certificate types like TLS, which is the SSL certificate that secures web connections. So 1 year would be the answer at time of production.
Okay.
I'd just like to add that from a user perspective, though, our integration with Entrust is being set up so that it's seamless, essentially. So as long as you're not really changing anything, you'd effectively just get a new certificate that would go live before the old one expired, and there'd be no interruption in your BIMI experience.
Okay, so there's nothing that the user would have to do then to get the updated certificate? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we're still working through some of the details specifically, and we have a little time to figure that out. But in the architecture that we're going to be rolling out, effectively, it'll just refresh the certificate, and nothing will have to be done to ensure continuity of the experience.
Yes,
all right,
that's correct.
Thank you. All right, I think we've got a little bit more time. We've got a couple more good questions here. Rahul, I'll start with you on this one. Implementing BIMI DMARC means that Google is going to be restricting mass mailings in the future if this protocol is not utilized. I guess that's the question. Does it mean that Google is going to be restricting mass mailings in the future if you're not using the protocol?
I'll jump in on this one, Rahul. I don't think we can speak for what Google is going to do. I can tell you, this is really an open push to incentivize organizations to have DMARC and to give them more or less a reason to do so, an economic reason to do so, and an incentive structure. So, I really can't read any more into that, but I think everyone's understanding where where they would like to go, and that is clearly more DMARC.
Yeah, I mean, so exactly. I don't think either of us can really speak to what Google's planning on doing, but what I would recommend is if you go actually to Google's recommendations for mass mailing, they'll tell you today on the public internet to do SPF, do DKIM, do DMARC. So that's what they're saying today. They're obviously making they're making a push through all of these technical standards to make it more attractive to deploy all of these technologies. So I would read into that what you will.
All right, I think we've got time for a couple more here. Chris, we're going to come back to you with this one. How come some people already have their photo or their logo on Gmail in the little circle on the left? Is this the same thing? So I guess the question is, are some people already have DMARC in place?
That is an excellent question. All right, so there is, I'm going to use the improper words here, so I won't use the Google terminology, so to simplify it. If you already have, in essence, a connection with someone, and you have your avatar with your picture on it, you can actually display the avatar into the other user's mailbox when they receive it. And that same area, that UI, is being utilized for this. However, if you are a mass marketer or you're sending massive emails, you don't have that same social connection. It's a one-way connection, and you cannot actually send that image and have that image automatically appear in the avatar space. So that is exactly how the VMC will be used in this scenario. So if you're a big organization and you send out hundreds of thousands of emails or millions, hundreds of millions of emails, you can't actually have your logo out there. But if you're sending out emails to your 20 friends, then you can. But it's not a scalable attack vector from a security standpoint. If that's the I'm trying to understand what the question is. But I think hopefully I answered that question.
Hey, Chris, just a quick comment. It might also be worth mentioning that BIMI is live for a select number of household brands, which you guys have been working with very closely. So that may also be where some of this is coming from.
Yes, and although I can't mention the names, there are some big sites that you might already have. If you have a Gmail account, you might want to be on the lookout, just looking at your Gmail environment to see some of these images starting to appear. If you're seeing them from big brands, then that is a pilot customer.
All right, great. And Rahul, I think we're going to end on this one, unless we get any more questions coming in live. If I already have SPF and DKIM, more of those acronyms, why would I need DMARC? So it's a good way to kind of round it up of why we need this again.
Yeah, no, good. I do apologize. It is a bit of an acronym soup when you're deep in the guts of email security. So SPF and DKIM, for people who are familiar with this, maybe you've set this up when you set up MailChimp, they are foundational technologies to support DMARC. The issues with these technologies that sort of came before, as it were, is they don't actually provide the security guarantees that a solution like BIMI would need. So while they are good and you should do them, they don't, in the first off, have any mechanism to give you that telemetry that I talked about at the beginning of this conversation. So you don't really get feedback on if it's working and if it's doing the right thing. So that's one half of DMARC. And the second half of DMARC is they're actually, they don't protect you against certain types of impersonation attacks that the DMARC spec builds on and helps you actually stop. So that's why when you look at what BIMI needs, for example, or what can affect some of your deliverability, a lot of that really comes into play with DMARC. So, you know, when you're doing DMARC, you're going to have to be doing SPF and DKIM, but that's not going to be enough. You're going to have to do more to really get the kind of security and deliverability benefits that this entire ecosystem can offer. So if you're doing SPF and DKIM, great. I recommend you start getting some telemetry from DMARC to make sure that the stuff that you've done is actually working the way you think it is. Because both of those just sort of are one way. They don't really give you any feedback. And the second piece is once you start getting that telemetry from your DMARC reports and from your DMARC tooling, you'll then be able to tweak that and close off the remaining security requirements to really protect your brand and qualify for a VMC.
Chris, anything on your end? You'd like to have the last word on this?
No, I think Raul has done a fantastic job. So that was it really is you know, a complex technology for some people to get their hands around. I think one of the advantages of using a tool like what Redshift has is it helps structure that complexity and puts it in a more digestible chunk that you can help manage and get to the proper DMARC status, you know, to have the proper policy. So it, you know, I would, you know, I think Rahul actually mentioned something earlier that if you do need some assistance, we would be willing to talk to you about it if you do need that. This is not a you know, a selling situation, but if you do need that assistance, we can certainly help you with that, and also with the trademark piece as well. We'd be more than happy to assist.
Yeah, I just put back up that slide with the email there at success@redshift.io. So folks, if you, as Chris just mentioned, if you have a question, you don't want a sales pitch, but you want to ask a question, you can go ahead and use that email. Gentlemen, before I close out, this audience just can't get enough of you. I'm not going to put this up in the slide view, but we did get a couple of questions at the end there of, is this only pertinent to Gmail for BIMI? And is it going to be, if so, is it going to be rolled out beyond Gmail? So either one of you, whoever wants to take that. Is this for other email, large email addresses as well, or is it just a Google-based initiative?
It is it's an industry effort to develop this. So Google is simply the first and probably largest set of end customers to support this. So as you can imagine, once that happens, it could be easily adopted by others. Other major mailbox providers have already pledged support. That is listed on the a website that we can share, but you know, I can certainly share that with you if you want to contact us. But others have not pledged publicly, but they have pledged privately. So this is happening, and this is the time to start looking into it and getting everything prepped to have this ready. You will have an advantage for a period of time being first adopters of this technology. So it could separate yourselves from you know, other emails that are in the box, so separating yourself from the noise. So our recommendation is to start looking at this. You know, quite frankly, especially if you're a B2C provider, you know, there really is no reason not to.
I just wanted to add one piece of qualification because we've also talked a little bit about the DMARC protocol that we need. Now DMARC is supported by everyone as a foundational technology. So you know, pretty much every inbox in EMEA in the US, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Hotmail, you know, pretty much every inbox is fully DMARC compatible today.
Great. Thank you both. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I do want to add that we did have other questions there, and I want to let everyone know that we are going to be passing along all your questions to our friends at RedSIF and Entrust to follow up. So please don't worry if you submitted a question and we just didn't have a chance to get to it, we will. I want to thank Rahul and Chris for a very informative presentation, and I want to thank you, audience, for all these great questions. This Q&A part of the presentation turned out to be really robust and allowed our speakers to share a lot of great information that wasn't part of the initial presentation, so I think we covered a lot of ground right here. So on behalf of the team at MarTech Today, I want to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and we will see you next time right here at MarTech Today.